Welcome to Thrive Deeper, the show based on the Thrive Bible reading guides. This is an ongoing conversation about God's Word with Thrive author, Dr. Matthew Jacoby.
Welcome, listeners, to Thrive Deeper. Matt, great to be back in the studio as we continue and, in fact, close out the book of Luke in our discussion. And listeners, hopefully you've been following along. And we got up to just the beginning of chapter 19. In fact, we covered the story of Zacchaeus, which many of us will know, really highlighted the fact that Jesus wanted to speak to those who had ears to hear. And Zacchaeus was one who had ears to hear. In fact, he climbed a tree because he didn't only want to hear, but he wanted to see, eyes to see, ears to hear. And he recognized who Jesus was and what he needed to change in his life way before the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the other religious people did. And Jesus was celebrating that. But as we move into this last part of Luke now, we are really going to start to see Jesus's move towards his crucifixion and then resurrection, obviously, and revealing who he is in a clearer way to the disciples, even though they still struggle to really understand that.
And as we move towards this, he is now preparing them for what is about to happen.
Yes.
And the parable that comes in the context, actually, of the time with Zacchaeus, and in fact, is at Zacchaeus' house. It says, while they were listening to this, he went on to tell them a parable. Okay, so we're still at Zacchaeus' place.
Yep.
And he switches to sort of preparing, because Zacchaeus is one of those who will be included in the kingdom of God. And he is also one of these people that is, there's a fruitfulness to his life. He's been willing to see, he has eyes to see, ears to hear, as you've said. And so the parable of the 10 minas or the 10 pounds, it's actually a bad guy who kind of represents God in a way. And it's confusing because of that, because we've had a few moments like this, like beginning of Luke 18, the parable of the unjust judge. It almost seems like God keeps comparing himself to bad people. But the point of these parables where it's the bad person who represents God, the point of these in each case is to say, if a bad person will heed or will act this way for the wrong reasons, how much more a good person for good reasons? That's the other one is in Luke 16, the complex parable of the steward, that wastes his possessions of his master. The idea there is, okay, if a bad person will store up wealth, thinking about the future for the wrong reasons, how much more should you for the right reasons, right? So in this parable of the 10 minas or the 10 pounds, we have a bad guy. He's going to go away and he's going to receive a kingdom. So this is actually it's a sort of thing that's, for example, Herod would do, would go. Yeah. So people are familiar with this scenario. You go to Rome, you receive the authority and you come back.
Right.
And Jesus uses an illustration like this. This is what the Herods had to do. So it's sort of illustrating himself in a way. I mean, he's going to go away, receive the kingdom and come back, but he's entrusting something to his disciples. And they're going to be accountable for that, for all of his people. Remember, a big theme in Luke is discipleship. Luke is very interested in discipleship and the cost of discipleship. He's writing this for the early church.
Yes.
And so faithfulness with what has been given is the key idea here. So they're all given the same.
Yes.
But some earns 10 more, one earns 5 more. But another servant says,
I kept it safe.
Yep, I kept it safe, hidden away. I was afraid because you're a hard man. You take out what you did not put in and you reap what you did not sow. And his master replied, I will judge you by your own words, you wicked servant. You knew that I'm a hard man taking out. This is the bit that confuses people, right? Because it's like, hang on, is this representing Jesus? Well, he's saying, I'm going to treat you in accordance with what you have expected of me. You testify against yourself, in a sense.
Yep.
So again, the point is, if you've got this bad guy that is owed this, how much more is Jesus, who is the true king, how much more do we owe him this faithfulness?
Yeah.
And let's not treat Jesus as a kind of mean or in a transactional way. We, however, need to respect the fact that we are accountable for what he gives to us, and that's the important part of discipleship. So the punchline is verse 26, I tell you that everyone who has will be given more, but for the one who has nothing, even what they have will be taken away. either Luke takes it from another context and puts it here.
Or we said it a few different times.
Yeah, because Matthew puts it there in chapter 13, but could well have said it a number of times. But the point is, if you're willing, more willingness will be given. If you're willing to be fruitful, if you are fruitful, God will expand your fruitfulness. But if you're not fruitful, if you're not faithful, then even what you have will be taken away from you. So that's the idea there. Speaking of the idea of kingship, this leads to this important moment. And this is really where we come to the final section of the Gospel of Luke. This is Jesus formally arriving as king. Now, in those days, kings would come in triumphal procession into cities. So this is sort of cast in a way that evokes that kind of event and imagery. Okay. So the way that all of this happens, and this is what we're going to see from this point on, Stu, is that everything is prepared beforehand.
Yeah.
So he sends them ahead to prepare the way to a village, to get the donkey, and it's all found to be prepared.
Yeah.
There's a sovereignty of God in all this. This is very, very important for everything that's going to happen from this time on, because things aren't out of control. They're still under God's sovereignty, even though people are vying against and rebelling against God and doing bad things. All of this sits under the sovereignty of God. So the colt is brought to Jesus. It's all provided very providentially. And there's this famous moment where he rides into Jerusalem, down the Mount of Olives, on the back of a donkey, and that evokes, of course, Zechariah chapter 9. Behold, your king comes to you, gentle and lowly, riding on a donkey. So he doesn't come riding on a war horse, right? He will come, as Revelation 19 tells us, he will come riding on a war horse, but that coming, that parousia, the Greek word, that's yet to come, right? This is his coming in peace for reconciliation. The form of his coming is coming in peace and reconciliation. His second coming will be to come as judge. So the
crowds start singing.
The crowds start singing. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. I mean, this is them proclaiming him as their Messiah.
Yes.
And the leaders, of course, object to that. Some of the Pharisees, it says, in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, rebuke your disciples." He says, "I tell you, if they keep quiet, the stones will cry out." Right? There's an inevitability to this, and you guys aren't facing it, which leads to him weeping over the city. So
and a prophecy of what's going to happen.
Yeah, that's right. So he weeps over this city, and at this stage, he's still kind of he's not yet in the city. The crowds are following him and proclaiming him, but he comes to this point on the Mount of Olives where he sees the city, and he weeps over it, and it's a heart-rending moment. If even you had only known this day what would bring you peace, but now it is hidden from your eyes. He is coming in peace. He's coming to bring peace. He's not coming on a war horse to lead them in a battle. He's coming in peace to bring peace. But, they want a military Messiah to lead them against the Romans, and that's going to lead to disaster, and he describes that disaster in verse 43, chapter 19 still. "The days will come upon you when your enemies will build an embankment against you, encircle you and hem you in on every side. They will dash you to the ground, you and the children within your walls. They will not leave one stone on another, because you did not recognize the time of God's coming to you." So this is basically casting the catastrophic event that actually occurred in 70 AD, the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple by the Romans, as a consequence of their rejection of Jesus. And you can see the consequence flows very naturally, because if they would listen, they would have listened to Jesus and chosen the way of peace, it wouldn't have happened. The Romans just didn't come.
No.
They didn't want to do what they did. The Jewish historian Josephus makes this very clear. It was only very reluctantly that the Romans broke into Jerusalem and destroyed the temple. I mean, it was the Jews that started the Jewish war. They rebelled against the Romans. But even when the Romans came up to Jerusalem, I mean, the fact that they destroyed everything was, again, because of the persistence of the Jewish people in holding out against them. And actually, ultimately, it was because the Zealots were using the temple as a fortress.
Right. Okay.
So Josephus sees the destruction of the temple as not a necessary thing, and is quick to, because the Romans didn't go, they were superstitious enough not to go around destroying temples, right?
If the Jews had just stayed quiet and remained compliant, then they would have been left alone.
Yeah, or even if their resistance didn't, in their resistance, they didn't inhabit in the temple precinct and turn that into a fortress.
Yeah.
But that's what they did.
Yeah.
Josephus thinks that in a sense, it was the Jews that committed an abomination that causes desolation during the siege of Jerusalem by turning it into a fortress. Anyway, but the point is, Jesus came in peace to lead them on a mission of peace, but they refused that. And so he's weeping over them because of what's going to happen as a result of their refusal.
And it's interesting, what happens next is the cleansing of the temple.
That's right. Because the temple is not being, as indeed it won't in
70?
In sort of 40 years' time from here, it'll be used as a fortress. Here it's being used as a marketplace.
Yeah.
And probably at best as a fairly transactional religious space. And Jesus performs this prophetic action. So this is him, this is him as this sort of prophetic figure. All of these actions are very symbolic. He's riding into Jerusalem on a donkey. He's turning over the tables in the temple. Judgment is beginning here in the house of God.
Yeah, it's from the inside out.
Yeah, that's
not
right.
the outside in.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes people use this instance to sort of justify going out into the world with a whip and sort of moralizing and moral policing the world. But no, this is Jesus coming to the heart of his people. This is very much judgment in the house of God, right?
Yeah.
And the whole problem here is that they'd made it into this religious center. It's meant to be a house of prayer for all nations, right? The all nations part is in the other Gospels. But here, Jesus is accusing them of making it into a den of
thieves.
And actually, the word that's used here evokes something more like not ordinary robbers, but bandits or brigands.
Okay.
I think this is anticipating what is going to happen, because bandits or brigands, this is what the Jewish people, and they were attacking. This was revolutionary behavior. We're going to see that the thieves crucified with Christ are also described as robbers, but they're not ordinary robbers. They're revolutionary fighters, like bandits, brigands, that attack Roman supply chains and so forth. So that's what Jesus is saying here, is that you've made this into, a fortress for brigands.
Yeah.
Which is literally what happens later on.
And the house of prayer for all nations is also a reflection back to Isaiah 56, where there's a prophecy at the end of Isaiah 56 where he says, my house will be called a house of prayer for all nations.
Yeah, that's right. It's interesting too, because, that statement is so significant because they were trying to drive the nations out.
That's right.
That was their revolutionary agenda against the Romans, was about driving the Romans out when God was wanting to draw the Romans in, right? That's the house of prayer for all nations. So it had become this place of kind of revolution, banditry in that sense.
And so, as you say, the juxtaposition of coming in on a donkey for the world to see as the king, but going into what is his place. Yeah. And actually acting more like the conqueror who's throwing out the money changers or the thieves.
That's right. So this naturally raises the question, who are you? Who do you think you are?
Yeah.
What authority do you think that you have?
There's probably a
this
good
now
commission,
becomes a
good commission going to the chief priests and with all the offerings that were being sold, I'm sure.
Yeah. So 20 verse 2, tell us by what authority you are doing these things and who gave you this authority. And he does something I think really shrewd here. He says, John's baptism, you tell me, I'll ask you I love this. He answers their question by throwing a question back because, of course, he is the judge. They have no right to judge him.
Yes.
He is their judge, right? So, I love the way he asks them this question. John's baptism, was it from heaven or from human origin, right? Because, of course, they didn't recognize that baptism, but the people did. And they're more concerned about their position with the people. And so it's a very shrewd way of kind of showing them up because
they can't answer either way.
They can't really answer either way because if John's baptism was of God, then, they didn't get baptized and they're not heeding. And certainly John pointed to him, right? So they're not following John. But if they say that it was just a human thing, all the people,
which were thousands by this time,
saw John as a prophet. And so this really shuts them up for the moment. And again, his time is not quite yet. So he's still got some work to do. So this sort of keeps them quiet for a few moments. But he really puts in the knife here. And again, because they're questioning him. And his answer is extended now on a very penetrating parable that basically describes them. They are tenants of God's vineyard. Already God's people have been described as a vineyard. Isaiah chapter 5, there's a very famous prophecy about Israel as the vineyard of God. But this is something that he's speaking with the religious leaders in mind. They are the carers
of the vineyard.
Of the vineyard.
Do you want me to read it?
Yeah.
Chapter 20, verse 9. Then he began to tell the people this parable. A man planted a vineyard, leased it to tenant farmers, and went away for a long time. At harvest time, he sent a slave to the farmers so that they might give him some fruit from the vineyard. But the farmers beat him and sent him away empty-handed. He sent yet another slave, but they beat that one too, treated him shamefully, and sent him away empty-handed. And he sent yet a third, but they wounded this one too and threw him out. Then the owner of the vineyard said, "What should I do? I will send my beloved son, perhaps they will respect him." But when the tenant farmers saw him, they discussed it among themselves and said, "This is the heir, let's kill him, so the inheritance will be ours." So they threw him out of the vineyard and killed him. Therefore, what will the owner of the vineyard do to them? He will come and destroy those farmers and give the vineyard to the others.
This is his summary of the history of God's dealings with this people. He sent them servants whom they have killed. Now, one of these was John the Baptist, who had been killed, but, you're thinking about
all the prophets.
Yeah, the prophets beforehand, many of whom were mistreated and killed. And finally, he has come as the Son. And so there's this idea that they have taken for themselves, they have appropriated what belongs to God, that the authority that they are claiming, you remember, because the question is still, by what authority? Essentially, he's turned that on them, that they have claimed an ownership and an authority. At least they're misusing an authority. They are just tenants, right?
Yes.
And God has come to them in Christ. This is the Son in this parable. And he's predicting this is what's going to happen now. They're going to kill the Son in order to seize the vineyard.
And he's looking for fruit from their leadership.
That's right. And
which they didn't give.
So Jesus is declaring judgment. What then will the owner of the vineyard do to them? He will come and kill the tenants and give the vineyard to others. Now, who are the others? Well, this actually could be talking about actually his followers, in a sense, become the people of God. That could be one. It's not saying that.
So you don't think it's saying that the stewardship of the gospel message is being taken off the Jewish people and given to everyone else, to the Gentiles?
No, I don't think that, because I don't think the Jewish people as such are completely replaced like that.
No.
I don't see that. I don't see that in Paul. I see that there's always this desire to have them step into their calling. You know what I mean? So what this is saying, in fact, what Paul says is, by the kingdom being given to them, it's almost to arouse, the right kind of jealousy, of the Jewish people. There is, however, this time in where it's actually handed over, goes out to the Gentiles. So there is that aspect to it. But, I think his disciples are, in a sense, going to be his 12 apostles are going to be the new 12 tribes in a way.
Yes,
Now, they're Jewish people, remember?
Yes, of course.
So it's not replacing, it's just, it's essentially replacing the leadership rather than replacing Jew with Gentile.
No. Then he goes on to say, when they heard this, they said, "No, never."
Well, and partly the reason why they say that is because the idea that they would be
thrown out.
Thrown out, like this could never happen. And almost they see this prediction is going against everything that God has said about his promises to his people. And now, of course, the 12 apostles are going to be, in a sense, the remnant of Israel. So remnant theology has this idea that, yes, God is faithful to his people, but not only the faithful amongst his people will be included in enjoying the faithfulness of God, in a sense. Yeah, they can't, there's a sense of entitlement here, which prompts them to say, no, this could never happen. That never. That's not possible. And he's saying, absolutely, it's inevitable, in fact.
And in fact, he asks them the meaning of the scripture. The stone that the builders rejected, this has become the cornerstone.
Yeah, that's right. He's talking about himself. And the cornerstone is like this crucial foundation stone of a building that also sets the pattern for the building as well. Everyone who falls on that stone will be broken to pieces. Anyone on whom it falls will be crushed. This is him predicting the judgment on those who reject the cornerstone. Of course, this is when the teachers of the law
they kind of lost it at this point. Yep.
They started looking for a way to arrest him, and because they realized he'd spoken this parable against them.
Yeah.
So one of the things that they need to do, because he has the support of the people, they can't just seize him. Again, they're afraid of the people, so they have to try to trick him or show him up, so it begins this contest, and the contest begins with really the ultimate question, the sort of hot button issue. And that is the issue of taxes. This is the Roman thing. Everyone was affected by taxes. If you wanted a hot button issue to corner Jesus with, this was the one.
But they start with the flattery, it's like, we know that you speak truthfully and all this kind of stuff. It's like, it's almost, that manipulative kind of way of, but Jesus is onto them. Basically, they ask the question, is it lawful for us to pay taxes to Caesar or not?
Yeah.
And Jesus, detecting their craftiness, he said to them, show me a denarius. Whose image and inscription does it have?
And this is a problem because they give him the denarius. So they've got this coin. And in fact, these people are quite wealthy. They've got lots of these coins, but these coins bear inscriptions on them, which from a Jewish point of view is blasphemous, right? To have these inscriptions, particularly in the temple precinct, right? Even the very cynical Herod Antipas, he stopped short of putting an image of himself on his coins. Like even because he knew that would be blasphemous for Jewish people. He turns it back on them in this sense.
Yes.
He shows them, you've got these coins that show this image of Caesar, right? You are complicit in some way.
Yeah.
And then comes the famous reply. He said to them, then give back to Caesar what is Caesar's and to God what is God's. It's a brilliant reply because this money belongs to Caesar. Whatever, give it to him.
But you belong to me.
Yeah. In this kingdom that he's ushering in, it's not about that anymore. It's not about money, and that's just part of life. We've got to transcend that, and the ultimate imperative here is to give to God what is God's, which is what they're not doing. This goes back to the parable of the tenants, right? They're not giving to God what is due to him.
And whose image are we created in?
Exactly. Good point. The next issue is one that the Sadducees bring up. By the way, the Pharisees was these popular kind of religious, like a religious order in a way. Sadducees are the official priestly class. So they're very much the ruling class. The priests, they only hold to the 5 books of Moses and they don't believe in a resurrection. So they're coming to have a shot at Jesus too. They put this trick question to him. They bring up a law of Moses about, the levirate marriage. If a woman has to, if her husband dies, she marries the brother to preserve the
family line
of the man that died. So suppose this happens again and again and again. Whose wife is she? When they get,
when they're resurrected.
That's right, at the resurrection.
Yeah.
But basically, Jesus' answer to this, it's brilliant because their focus on marriage involves a perspective bounded by the horizons of the world, right? Marriage is an institution for this world. But for those that God deems worthy of the resurrection life, like there's a new mode of existence. This is the point of what he's saying.
Yeah.
Resurrection existence is a deathless realm, right? So there's no place for taking steps to provide sons to carry on the family name.
Yeah.
It'd be out of place to think in terms of a cycle of generations, right? So that's the idea here. That sort of your whole way of thinking is not consistent with the nature of the resurrection life. And then he brings up what God says about, I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He's not the God of the dead, but the living, right? Why would God say, I am the God of these if they weren't in some sense living?
He would say, I was.
Yeah, that's right. The next challenge that he puts to them is around the Messiah and this common expectation that the Messiah was to be the son of David, which is true. He is to be a son of David, but he wants to challenge them. This is in the context, he's challenging them to think bigger, right, than just a worldly sense.
How we think things work generationally. Right. Yep.
So David says in the Psalms, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand. This is something that they recognize, right? If he's his Lord, how can he just be his son? And the just is, I'm putting the just in there as an interpretive thing, but he is in a sense a son of David, but he's so much more.
Yes.
And so he's challenging them to recognize who he is. Then he says to his disciples, and this is a shortened version in Luke, a shortened version of what in Matthew chapter 23 is a very long series of rebukes against them. scribes and Pharisees. But he warns his disciples against these religious leaders, says they love to walk around in flowing robes and love to be greeted and respected in the marketplaces, have the most important seats and honour at banquets. They devour widows' houses and for show of sympathy make lengthy prayers. These men will be punished most severely. So as I said, that's a shortened version of what we have in Matthew chapter 23. Now, completely continuous with this, as Jesus is saying this, we read in chapter 20, he looks up and he sees all of these rich religious people putting their gifts into the temple treasury, right? They're dropping their coins.
Yeah.
At the same time, he sees a poor widow put in 2 small copper coins, right? Just tiny amount. Sort of a quarter of an hour of a day labourer's, almost, a day labourer's. But he says, truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all the others. All these people gave gifts out of their wealth, but she out of her poverty put in all she had to live on. The continuation of this theme, as Jesus has said previously, and this is a big theme in Luke, and it's Luke alone that actually has Jesus say outrightly, unless a person gives up all that they have, they cannot be my disciple.
Yeah.
Here is a true disciple, this woman that's given up everything that she has. These men that claim to be, the epitome of godliness, they're just giving out of their wealth. They're giving their spare change.
Yeah.
They are not true disciples.
And more the point, I think there was a level of outward sort of religious display in that, whereas for her, she's not going to make a big deal of putting in the 2 little things she has, but God knows that was everything she had.
That's right.
Kingdom.
So they're in the temple precincts, you'll recall, and some of his disciples are remarking about the temple and how beautiful it is. And Jesus says to them, the time will come when not one stone will be left on another, right? He's already said that, and he reminds them of that here. And they ask him, when will these things happen and what will be the sign that they are about to take place? This leads to his famous Olivet discourse, and we have this, Matthew tells us that this conversation happens up on the Mount of Olives, so it's known as the Olivet discourse. But Luke just puts it in this to this passage here. Now, one of the concerns that Jesus has here is that they don't confuse the events that are going to happen around the destruction of Jerusalem. They don't confuse that as the ultimate end, as the ultimate coming.
Okay. Yep.
Because as these things are happening, there are going to be lots of false teachers and false prophets.
Yep. This is
amongst the Jews who are going to say, this is it. You've got to get involved in this, the resistance against the Romans. This is our time. And false messiahs literally do come up.
Yep.
Not only around the destruction of Jerusalem, but even the very famous Bar Kokhba was the rebellion, which is during the time of Hadrian, sort of 135 AD. I mean, he was proclaimed by the head rabbi as being the Messiah of Israel, right? So false messiahs definitely going to come, but don't be fooled by these guys, okay? So he says to them, verse 10, nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes, famines, pestilences in various places, and fearful events, great signs from heaven, right? And all these are all of the things that surrounded the Jewish wars. And Josephus, the Jewish historian, well worth a read, by the way. I mean, his Jewish wars by Josephus, really important background to all of this. But he says, but before this, they will seize you and persecute. They will hand you over, put in prison. You'll be brought before kings and governors on account of my name, and you will bear testimony. And this is a sort of parenthesis where he's saying what is going to affect you is that you're going to be sorely persecuted through this time. Now, he's still talking about the immediate future in the next generation. For the next 40 years, they're going to be severely mistreated by their own people as well as beyond in the Gentile world as well. And we know that under Nero and so forth, the Christians were persecuted. But he assures them, but look, you are looked up, not a hair of your head. Stand firm and you will win life. So don't be deceived. Don't fall away because of persecution. And then he says in verse 20, when you see Jerusalem being surrounded by armies, that you will know its desolation is near, right? Because again, the Jews in Jerusalem were saying, this is our moment, we're going to win, God's going to come to our aid. No, don't be deceived by that, right? This is it is going to be desolated. And in a sense, this is sort of the authenticator of Jesus as a prophet. I mean, all the Old Testament prophets like think of Isaiah, for example. They predicted events that happened in their lifetime. That's how the people knew that they were prophets. According to the law in Deuteronomy, how can you tell if a prophet is a true prophet if what they say comes about? Right. So he says to them, and in fact, he says, this will happen within this generation, and a generation is 40 years, and it happens in 40 years' time from this point. Jerusalem surrounded, laid siege to, and ultimately desolated. This is him as prophet now, right? Jerusalem, he says in verse 24, will be trampled on by the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles are fulfilled.
Yes.
And what does that mean? I mean, there's a lot of debate around this mean, but the fact is that Jerusalem's going to be handed over to the Gentiles for a time. And of course, we know that after these rebellions, certainly after the Bar Kokhba rebellion in 135, the Jews were expelled from the land. And, they were largely barred from the land until sort of 1949.
Long time.
So again, there's a prophecy that was fulfilled. And then he jumps to the end times, because the fact is prophecy is fulfilled cyclically, right? So the fact that these things happen is then going to be an authenticating sign of what he's saying about the distant future. That's the idea here.
Right.
So he's making predictions about the destruction of Jerusalem.
That can be verified.
That can be verified.
Yep.
So that
he can predict then into the future, which can't be verified by the current people because they don't live that long.
That's right. Exactly. So he then jumps to the very end times. There will be signs in the sun, moon, and stars on earth. Nations will be anguish and perplexity, the roaring and tossing of the sea. I mean, this is now talking about the end times, right? And then he tells them this parable. Look at the fig tree and all the trees. When they sprout leaves, you can see for yourselves. You know that summer is near. Even so, when you see these things happening, you know that the kingdom of God is near. Right, so we can tell from the signs of the times, fulfillment of these predictions is meant to prompt us to be vigilant and alert. Be careful, or your hearts will be weighed down with carousing, drunkenness, and the anxieties of life, and that day will close on you suddenly like a trap. Okay, so don't
be complacent.
Don't be complacent. Look at the signs around you and know that this is all going to come crashing down at some point. So the destruction of Jerusalem is like a signifier.
It's a verifier that what he says is going to come to pass.
It's a verifier, and it becomes a sort of a type. The great antitype is the end time. So it prefigures. It's a great prefiguring event. What happens to Jerusalem is going to happen to Babylon, which is how Revelation casts the world system. That leads into now the final section as we move into chapters 22 to 24. And we have here a reminder of the bigger picture, because as the time of the Passover comes, we read that we are told, verse 3 of chapter 22, then Satan entered Judas, called Iscariot. Here is Satan mentioned, right? We haven't, we've seen demon-possessed people, but he's had his contest with Satan after his baptism. And that speaks again, Satan left him until an opportune time. And now this is it, right? So Satan enters Judas. It's interesting. This is really significant because he is attacking from within. It's a really important point. The attack doesn't come from without.
Yes.
It comes from within. There's one of their own is enticed and becomes an instrument for Satan. And honestly, Stu, if you look at the history of the church, most of the undermining of God's, and the church has never been destroyed from without. It's always been corruption from within. It's been betrayal from within.
And in fact, conversely, where the church is most persecuted, particularly now in the world, is where it's probably the strongest and growing the fastest.
Yeah.
Interestingly.
That's right. This leads, of course, to the famous Last Supper. So Judas goes off. He makes this deal with the religious leaders. See, they can't, it's important to just remember, they can't just go take Jesus when he's in the midst of the crowds.
Because they'll get mobbed.
They will get mobbed. They have to get him while he's on his own. And this is where, because they don't know where he is. So Judas.
And then they can control the narrative as well.
Exactly. Exactly. So Judas is the one that betrays him. And meanwhile, Judas he's at the supper for a time as well. And he goes from the supper. So he's part of this final feast in a sense. So all of this, again, this idea, go make preparations. Jesus is preparing them. This Last Supper is largely about preparation for what's about to happen. So he's going to sit down at a table. He's going to explain to them beforehand why it's all going to happen, right? The symbols of that
Blood,
basically, he's basically going to say to them, I am the Passover lamb, right?
Yes.
So this is the Passover. And so he's going to take these symbols of the bread and the cup, the bread and wine, shed blood, broken body. He's preparing them, right? This is what I'm doing. You will do this in remembrance of me. So that's the significance. And we know at this supper, in John, we have the extended discourse at this time.
So just coming back to that very briefly, the original Passover was to remember God setting them free from Egypt.
Yeah.
And now what Jesus is saying, now from this point forward, you're to remember this as me setting you free from the domination and control of sin, basically.
That's right. Of sin and Satan. So this is in a sense, the true Exodus. This is the big one, right? And this is what he's commemorating there. And so he's instituting this new meal, this new Passover, as it were, that is going to define their fellowship. It's interesting that it's in this context. I mean, first of all, he says the Son of Man will go as it has been decreed, and Luke's presentation of the passion narrative of Jesus, betrayal and suffering and death. There's a sort of a calmness to the it's not to take away from the suffering, but there's a certain calmness, there's a certain trust in God's sovereignty through all this, right?
In a sense, it's almost
the Son of Man will go as it has been decreed. There it is. But woe to the one who betrays him, right? And so they began questioning themselves, who is going to be the one who's going to betray them, right? Now this leads to a dispute. Okay, if someone's going to betray, who's going to be...
Then there's a hierarchy here.
Yeah. Because they're thinking, oh, how could anyone betray Jesus, right? Now, Judas betrays Jesus. If you put everything together, he basically realizes that Jesus isn't who he wanted him to be. He's not this kind of military leader that's
going to defeat the Romans.
He's going to defeat the Romans. And that seems to be what the issue that Judas has. It's not going as he thought it was. Now, what the next bit underscores is that the disciples aren't actually that much better.
No, I was just going to say, I don't know.
Because it says a dispute arose among them as to which of them was to be considered the greatest. Jesus uses this as a teaching moment, right? Because they're still a little bit stuck on this old plan. They can't quite get rid of this idea that he's going to become king and they're going to have all the different positions. I mean, it's like they're meeting out the position. Who's going to be the treasurer? Who's going to be the
who's
first and the second, and who's going to be in charge of what, right?
Yeah.
When Jesus becomes king, right? Who's going to do what? I mean, they think we better get organized because surely the big confrontation is coming, right?
Yeah.
And Jesus is saying, it is, but it's going to be inverse to what you think it is, right?
Yeah.
So it's very difficult for them. And so they're kind of making the same mistake as Judas, and it's going to be their undoing because they're not going to be prepared for this, because Peter, who thinks that he is the greatest and the most dedicated, and is told that he's going to betray Jesus 3 times, right? And in fact, down in verse 31,
that's
so first of all, Jesus gives them a lesson in true greatness, right?
Which is service.
Which is about service. I mean, we take this for granted now, Stu. This is so countercultural. No one talked like this. No one said this stuff like. Because he says the kings of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those who exercise authority over them call themselves benefactors. But you are not to be like that. Instead, the greatest among you should be like the youngest, and the one who rules like the one who serves. This ideal of servant leadership is set down here.
And I think the point you make is really important, because we do tend to think, but we've got to realize this is what's shifted this. This is what shifted the culture to what we now go, well, that's the best way to do it. It is. And Jesus told us it was the best way to do it.
Yeah, that's right. And it's not, the whole thing is inverse, because the battle isn't against people. The battle is for people against Satan, right?
Yeah.
And, in the midst of this conversation about who's going to be the greatest and the best, in the light of what he's just said about Judas and their shock, indignation, how could anyone do that?
Yeah.
Well, he says to Peter, Simon, Simon, Satan has asked to sift all of you as wheat, but I have prayed for you, Simon, that your faith may not fail. And when you have turned back, strengthen your brothers, right? He knows that they are all going to turn away from him.
Yeah.
In fact, he says to Peter, you're going to, before the rooster crows, because Peter says, no, I won't. But he says, before the rooster crows, before the morning, you are going to deny me 3 times. And of course, we know that this happens.
And in our English language, just for clarity as well on that, to sift you is a plural you. So all of the disciples, as you just said then. But the second one, but I've prayed for you, is a singular you, Simon.
Yeah, that's right. Jesus says something strange now, Stu. He says that when I sent you out with purse, bag, or sandals,
he talks about first of all, he just gives another prophecy about the rooster crowing 3 times, which I think is important to mention because he kind of again gives Peter a sign that's going to be a reminder to him later.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Well, it's an important reminder because it shows that he knew this beforehand.
It's all in God's hands still.
Yeah.
Nothing's out of control here.
The sovereignty of God, that's right. Big theme here. Now he says, when I sent you out with purse, bag, or sandals, did you lack anything? No, okay, nothing, they answered. He said to them, but now if you have a purse, take it. If you have a bag, and also a bag, and if you don't have a sword, sell your cloak and buy one. It is written, and he was numbered with the transgressors. I tell you that this must be fulfilled in me. Yes, what is written about me is reaching its fulfillment. So there's the fulfillment idea, but why this, if you have a purse, take it, and also a bag. If you don't have a sword,
get one.
Sell your cloak and buy one. This is basically him saying, get ready for, essentially he's saying, things are changing now. This is not just a home sort of mission. Get ready for travel. These things are what you do. You get when you travel.
Right. Okay.
You get your sword and your purse and your bag.
We're taking this beyond here.
Yeah. You can sell your dressing gown. We're traveling. You're on the road now, right? Yep. And he doesn't mean we're going to battle. That's not what he means. And in fact, the disciples said, see, Lord, here are 2 swords. They misunderstand. They think he's talking about battle. And he says, that's enough, he replies. In other words, we're not starting an army.
Right.
They didn't quite get the gist of what he was saying.
I didn't either, actually. So I'm glad you clarified that.
Because, well, again, as we'll see, Peter strikes with one of these swords.
Yes,
he strikes the ear of the high priest's servant. And Jesus says to him, no more of this. I mean, he rebukes him. That's not that's not the sort of thing that we're going to be doing. So Jesus goes out onto the Mount of Olives. This is where he prays. He's preparing himself for what's about to happen. It's the ultimate, again, for Luke is writing this. This is also an insight into the nature of discipleship. Not my will, but your will be done. It's willing to go through whatever you need to go through to serve God, right? And watch and pray. This is the model for how to bear the sort of persecution that he's just described, right?
It's going to come.
He's just described, he's just warned them that there's going to be persecution. How do you survive that? By doing what Jesus does, right? Watch and pray. Of course, when he comes back there sleeping and he says to them, get up and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. Again, this is not just about then. I mean, it is about then because, of course, they're not ready for this.
No, that's right.
Peter's going to fall away. He's going to deny Jesus. He should have been praying and preparing himself. But it's also a exhortation that I think speaks to all disciples of all time, right? Yeah, watch and pray, lest you fall into temptation. Great advice. Jesus finally, so Judas gets there, he arranges, and the sign is the man who I kiss is the one, because not all the soldiers know or have seen Jesus. And this is, in a sense, to perhaps Judas thinks, we won't give it away, it's a bit of a trick, you know what I mean? I'll go and I'll embrace Jesus
like I normally would.
Yeah, like I normally would, as though I've come in friendship. And I'll give him a kiss, and then you'll know, and you can that'll be the sign that you come in.
But of course, Jesus
otherwise they'd run away. Because he's thinking, if we just come with soldiers and charge, they'll run away. But of course, Jesus isn't going to run away.
No, that's right.
Because he's expecting this. He knows it's all it's happening, and they're not to retaliate. That's why he rebukes Peter when he pulls out the sword and cuts off the high priest's servant's ear. This is not what we're doing. This has all been, as he has said previously, everything that has happened is to fulfill the scriptures. Because, of course, he is the Passover lamb. Then we have this heart-rending account of Peter. We zoom into Peter, and while everything is happening in different...
sort of camped in the courtyard.
Yeah, he's camped in the courtyard, and different people say, because Jesus has been taken for trial. Oh, you're one of his, aren't you?
Yeah.
And exactly as Jesus said 3 times, he denies Christ, and he hears the rooster crow. And verse 62 is heartbreaking, and he went outside and wept bitterly. From here, the emphasis in the text in how Jesus is treated in the trials and in his various punishments is, first of all, it highlights how they mocked him. Now, this is an honor-shame kind of culture. And the fact is, crucifixion was not just about
killing a person
or torturing them. It was actually about humiliation upon a person. In honor shame culture, this is a very big deal. Humiliating the person, shaming them, right? They would be, nailed up nude, in front of everyone. It was a terrible form of shaming. So the text, because when we get to the crucifixion account, we're just told, and they crucified him there.
Yes.
All of the emphasis is on how people mocked Jesus, right? So, those who are guarding Jesus, it says in chapter 22, verse 63, began mocking him and beating him, right? The other theme then in this is Jesus' innocence, right? He is brought before trial and he is innocent on every count. So Luke is highlighting the fact that all of this is unjust. He's brought before the chief priest. There's probably a couple of meetings here. This is where there's some differences in the accounts, not because they contradict. There would have been multiple meetings. They would have brought him in, sent him out, talked, brought him back in. This one is probably as where they've brought him back in, because he says, "If you are the Messiah," they said, "Tell us." Jesus answered, "If I tell you, you would not believe me. And if I ask you, you would not answer." Of course, because remember the bit about John the Baptist?
Right. Yeah.
When he said,
"Well, you
the
tell me."
baptism of John, was
Yeah.
it from... That was a question around authority. He's saying...
So I can tell you, but you won't believe me. And if I ask you, you're not going to answer. So
exactly.
The moot point, guys.
But he says, "But from now on, the Son of Man will be seated at the right hand of the mighty God." I'm going to be seated in the position of authority at the right hand of God. They replied, "Are you then the Son of God?" His reply is ambiguous. "You say that I am." The problem is the way that they understand these terms.
Yes.
This is where a straight answer isn't really possible.
By this point, they're going, "Well, we've seen him enough times. We've talked enough times. The testimony's clear.
He's a blasphemer.
He's a blasphemer. Yep.
But they can't condemn him to death.
No.
They don't have the authority to do that. Only Pilate, the local governor, the Roman governor, can do that. So they take him to Pilate, and they began to accuse him of Pilate. Now, how are they going to get Pilate to kill him?
They're trying to incite the fact that he's positioning himself as the king and the ruler.
He's subverting our nation.
Taxes.
He opposes payment of taxes to Caesar.
Which is not what he said at all.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He claims to be Messiah, just so that that's a king. Anyway, there's this, he interrogates Jesus. We have a, shortened version of this here. And he says to them in verse 4 of chapter 23, "I find no basis for a charge against this man." That's a repeated statement through this, right? Anyway, when he finds out that Jesus is originally a Galilean, he thinks, great.
I don't have to deal with this.
Yeah, he's in a really sticky situation. He was on thin ice with the authorities in Rome. He's meant to be keeping peace. Like, they just cannot afford more problems here.
And him and Herod didn't get on particularly well, who he's about to see.
Yeah, that's right.
So he's like, "I'm not going to do anything that could get me in trouble.
Exactly.
You make the call, Herod. I'm sending him to you."
So he's delighted to send him off. But, Herod just sort of toys with him, mocks him. There's more mocking here at this stage. It says, then Herod and his soldiers ridiculed and mocked him, but basically he doesn't take him that seriously. I mean, you think this guy, okay, he's just Herod probably thinks just a madman. He's just, how can this guy, this ragged...
What are we worried about here, guys?
Galilean guy claim to be king? He's not at all threatened by him. And I think, and Luke wants us to see that. Herod is not really threatened by this guy, right? So he sends him back to Pilate. And we're actually told that day Herod and Pilate became friends. I mean, it's like finally they agree on something.
Yep. Well, it's a united against the enemy.
Yeah, so he calls together. So Pilate calls them all back in, all the leaders. He said, "I've examined him in your presence, and I've found no basis for a charge against him. Neither is Herod," right? So the actual rightful authorities have found no charge against him. This is the emphasis here.
Yeah.
But I'll punish him just to kind of keep him happy and, for being a troublemaker. That's probably, what he can do. I can punish him for being a troublemaker, but I'll release him. Right, but the whole crowd shouted. And, Matthew has given us more details about how the crowd is, because there's this, they're used to this moment at the Passover when Pilate is going to release a prisoner as a kind of a gesture to the Jewish people.
An exchange.
Yeah, it's kind of an exchange, that's right. But they demand, rather than Jesus, they demand Barabbas, right? Release Barabbas to us. There's an irony here, because Barabbas means son of the Father. That's what Bar Abbas, right? Bar is son, Abbas is father, right? Son of the Father. So Barabbas is released, yet the real son, who's innocent, goes to his death. So they've freed the wrong son, essentially. Again, for a third time, he speaks to them. Why? What crime has this man committed? But they insist, and we read in verse 23 that their shouts prevail. So he gives them over. It says he surrendered Jesus to their will in the NIV. So he's led away to be crucified. We have this story here, Stu, of Simon from Cyrene. We're told he was on his away from the
to
country.
Jerusalem.
We're told a little bit more about him, that he was the father of Alexander and Rufus. Evidently, this is someone that is known to the later Christian community, or his children are certainly known to the Christian community. The importance of the mention of him is that he becomes a model disciple. So we're still in Luke, and Luke is very interested in discipleship and in the cost of discipleship. I know I've said that a million times, but that's the significance of this, right? Because he carries the cross behind Jesus.
Yes.
So he becomes a model disciple. He carries the cross of Christ following behind Jesus.
Yeah.
That's the idea of that. Large number of people follow him, including women who wail and mourn. And he says to them, look, what's happening to me is nothing compared to what's about to come. I mean, he says, for the time will come when you will say, blessed are the childless women, the wombs that never bore and breasts that never nurse. Then you will say, mountains fall on us, hills cover us. He is again warning them because of what's happening now. There's a judgment coming within that generation. We're told that 2 other criminals are let out to be executed with him. He's taken the place of Barabbas on the cross.
Yes.
So Barabbas would have been the third. So 3
probably rebels.
They're rebels. Again, the idea of the thief on the cross, they're not just common thieves, they're brigands, right? They're sort of freedom fighters, right, who rob and kill Romans, basically. Yes. So presumably Barabbas's 2 accomplices are crucified, are on the cross. I mean, significantly, Jesus has taken the place of Barabbas on the cross, whose son means son of the Father. I mean, there's a significance in that too, because Barabbas kind of represents the revolutionary agenda
of the people.
Yeah, of the people. Of a lot of the people at that time. Not all of the people, by the way, because the the Pharisees and Sadducees obviously differed on a lot of things. The Sadducees did not want the Romans ousted because the Romans upheld their authority. Yeah. So and they were enriched significantly thereby. So we're told that as the people are mocking Jesus, he asks for their forgiveness. And this again is a clue to what's happening here, right? He's not saving himself from the cross. He's doing this to secure their forgiveness. And even as they are mocking him, he says, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do. And they divided up his clothes by casting lots. That's a fulfillment of Psalm 22. But there's also this sense they take the last thing of his. This is the parable of the tenants, them stealing.
Yeah, right.
This is sort of a fulfillment of that as well. Like they're taking the last thing that belongs to him, essentially, for themselves. From verse 35, verse 36, and verse 39 of chapter 23, we're told they sneered at him, they mocked him, they hurled insults at him in different ways. Including one of the criminals, we're told in verse 39, who hung there, hurled insults at him. Aren't you the Messiah? Save yourself and us. And this is where we have something that is unique to Luke, actually.
Okay.
The other criminal says, don't you fear God, since you are under the same sentence. We are punished justly for what we are getting, what our deeds deserve, but this man has done nothing wrong, right? He recognizes not only that Jesus has done nothing wrong, but he's a king, right? This is our Messiah, right? So he says, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom.
So he acknowledges who Jesus is. He has eyes to see, ears to hear.
Yeah. And I think he's thinking maybe beyond the resurrection or something, but Jesus gives him more than even he could have imagined, because he says, no, today you will be with me in paradise. Yeah. And this word paradise, there was this expectation of this paradise with God before the resurrection. That was emerging in Jewish thought of Jesus' day. This
like a heaven, the
idea of paradise. It was an old Persian word actually that sort of evoked these beautiful gardens, and it was evoked the Garden of Eden, right? And it came to be understood as a sort of pleasant resting place for some of those who die in the Lord would go to this place. So that was already part of Jewish belief at the time. And he's referring to that. Today you will be with me in this resting place for the godly. You will be there today.
And he didn't do anything else except acknowledge Jesus was. Yeah.
Exactly. We have all these signs. It was noon, but darkness comes over the whole land at 3 p.m. The sun stops shining, some kind of eclipse or something. These are important in the context of the ancient world. These are to be taken as cosmic signs of something very significant happening. We're told the temple curtain is torn. Matthew tells us that there's an earthquake. Jesus calls out, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. And then he breathes his last. We have this moment here, centurion, and And I think presence of a centurion here is important because Luke is writing for a Gentile, a Gentile official, right? So it's the centurion here, yet again, there is this, here is a Gentile who recognizes, we have the thief, the Gentile recognizing this is a righteous man. We're told when all the people who had gathered to witness this saw what took place, they beat their breasts and went away. They sensed there's something.
They'd made a mistake.
Yeah, they've made a mistake. But all those who knew him, and it's interesting, we're not told disciples, just all those who knew him, because remember, he ministered had many
thousands.
People followed him around, right? Including the women who had followed him from Galilee. They stood at a distance watching these things. Now, there could be a couple of reasons for this. Maybe they don't want to be numbered with those who are standing around mocking him. I think that's
part of it.
That's a big part of it, because there's a crowd standing around mocking him, and they don't want to be in that crowd, right? They're separated themselves off from him. He is buried.
Grave borrowed from another.
Yeah, as again in fulfillment of the prophecy in Isaiah 53, buried among the rich. So not everyone, it's important that not all of the Jewish council were against him. Here is a member of the Jewish council who gives him his grave. That's a way of saying, you are part of my family, or I am part of your family.
Yeah.
Because that's his family tomb,
That's
right?
It's a big thing.
So he gives his family tomb to Jesus. These details are important about the burial so that we know that he was dead and buried.
Yes.
Right, he was wrapped. So he's definitely dead. This is no sense in which he's fallen asleep or anything like this. The women who came with Jesus from Galilee, they followed Joseph, right? They saw the tomb and how his body was laid in it, right? It's just all of this, this point is being made that the resurrection wasn't some ruse. And then we have the account of the resurrection. It's significant, Stu, that it's the women who witness this, and they become the first witnesses. It's the women who become the first witnesses to the resurrection. Now, the early church was a resurrection movement, and to be a witness of Christ was to be a witness to a risen Christ. And these women are the first. This is not something, by the way, that you would make up if you were trying to make up a credible account, because women couldn't be accepted as witnesses in court. Yeah. I mean, just the way it was in the ancient world. But here they're given primacy of place. The tomb's empty. They encounter the angels saying he's not here, he's risen. They tell the 11 disciples, 12 minus Judas, of course. It says they did not believe the women. They're really struggling, these guys.
Yep.
They didn't believe the women. This is actually important because it connects to the next story, right? They don't really believe. The words seem to them like nonsense, right? How can that be, right? They don't. And actually,
Peter was the only one who straight away.
Yeah, that's right. But even Peter, when he sees the empty tomb and the strips of linen, he's wondering to himself what had happened. He still can't believe he's risen. He's been told he's risen.
Yes.
But he still doesn't really quite get it.
What's happened here? Have the Romans stolen him or something?
That's right. And this is where Luke, who is interested in discipleship, how do we get it? And this next story, I think, is important for answering this question, right? Because a couple of disciples are walking along this road to Emmaus, and they're talking about everything that happened. They're trying to understand what was going on, and Jesus walks with them, but they're kept from recognizing.
They don't recognize him, yeah.
Right. And so he talks with them along the way, and they tell him
what's been going on, and story, essentially. They reflect the story to him that he knows well.
When he asks them, it's funny actually, they say, are you the only one visiting Jerusalem who doesn't know what's happened?
Where have you been, hiding under a rock
actually
or something?
He's the only one who does know. Yes, he's the only one who doesn't know. I think there is actually intended irony in that. Like, are you the only one that doesn't know what's happened?
Yeah.
And he's the only one that does know what's happened. He works with them, asks them what things, right, about Jesus of Nazareth, and they because he wants to hear how much they think they understand. And they tell him, these women, they found the tomb empty, and they came back saying that he was alive, right? Then some of our companions went to the tomb and found it just as the women, but they didn't see Jesus. And then Jesus said to them, how foolish you are, and how slow to believe all the things the prophets have spoken. So this is again going back to, Peter doesn't understand. They don't, but that when they're told by the women, they don't understand. This is all connected with that, right?
Yeah.
And what does he do? He goes to the scriptures.
Right to the beginning, to Moses.
He goes to the scriptures, right? And he goes through the scriptures, the Moses and the prophets, and he explains to them what the scriptures had said concerning himself. This is very important. But it's not until he actually breaks bread with them
that
they recognize. And this is there's such significance here, because it says he took bread, gave thanks, broke it, and began to give it to them. So it's a sort of repeat of the Lord's Supper. And there's this sense that through their participation in that, they see. I think there's a real symbolism to that. It's through this fellowship meal, that this understanding comes through fellowship with Christ. And then they recognize him.
Yeah.
They've been kept from recognizing. Now when he breaks bread, they recognize him. And I think, again, with Luke's concern for discipleship and the institution of community and the coming together in community, it's going to cause a lot of persecution, them coming together, breaking bread together.
Yeah.
Right. This is a forum in which we recognize Christ together. I mean, there's so many layers here of significance to that account. There are many appearances to the disciples, and at one stage, Jesus appears to them and he stands among them, even though, they're in a locked room. He stands among them, but it's not a ghost, right? They think it's a ghost. Yeah. So he says to them, I'm not a ghost. Do you have something to eat, right? And he eats something to show them that he's not a ghost.
Yes. Yeah.
So because ghosts don't eat, or spirits is in the Greek. It's spirit. And then he opened their minds, we're told again. So this connected with Emmaus. Yet again, he opens their minds to understand the scriptures. He told them, this is what was written. The Messiah will suffer and rise from the dead on the third day. And verse 47, repentance for the forgiveness of sins will be preached in his name to all nations, beginning at Jerusalem. This is the Great Commission, according to Luke. Repentance for the forgiveness of sins will be preached in his name to all nations, beginning at Jerusalem. You are witnesses of these things. I'm going to send you what my Father has promised. He's talking about the Holy Spirit, and he's going to continue, volume 2 in the book of Acts, but stay in the city until you have been clothed with power from on high. He's going to repeat that statement later. We're told that he is then taken up out of their sight, taken up into heaven, and they worship him. They return to Jerusalem with great joy. And we're told they stayed continually at the temple praising God.
Amazing.
And this sets us up for the book of Acts.
Which is where we're going next.
There was a lot there, Stu, but I think one of the key ideas for Luke is what it means to be a disciple of Jesus. We follow the true Savior, God with us. We follow the one who is the true King of the world, but his kingship is exercised not by worldly power, but by the power of the Spirit. And we're going to see that as we continue in the book of Acts.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Thrive Deeper. Our home on the internet is thrivetoday.tv. You can contact us, ask questions, see all our resources and much more at our website thrivetoday.tv. We really appreciate the questions and thoughts about what you're reading as we go through the Bible with Thrive. Until next time, our prayer is that these shows will inspire you to go deeper and thrive.